The telegram arrived on the hottest day of August in 1882, and Helena Rose knew her old life in Boston was about to end forever. She clutched the thin paper in her trembling hands as she stood on the train platform in Coolidge, Kansas, a town so small she might have blinked and missed it entirely if the conductor had not called out its name 3 times. The journey from Massachusetts had taken 5 grueling days, and now her body ached in places she had not known could ache. Dust coated her dark blue traveling dress, and she imagined she looked nothing like the carefully posed photograph she had sent to Xander James 3 months prior. The platform was nearly empty except for an older woman selling preserved fruit from a weathered cart and 2 men loading wooden crates onto a wagon. Helena scanned the sparse crowd, searching for the man who had written her such thoughtful letters over the past season. His words had been kind, practical, and surprisingly gentle for a cattle rancher in the Kansas plains. He had told her about his ranch, about the open sky that stretched endlessly, about the honest work that filled his days. He had also been honest about the loneliness. She had answered his advertisement because she had her own reasons for leaving Boston. Her parents had died within 6 months of each other the previous year, leaving her with nothing but debts and a boarding house room she could no longer afford. Her options had been limited: to become a governess or a companion to some wealthy widow, or perhaps to accept the persistent and unwelcome advances of Mr. Theodore Winters, her father's former business partner, who was twice her age and had hands that wandered where they should not. The advertisement had seemed like Providence. Honest rancher seeking educated woman for marriage, must be hardworking, kind, and willing to build a life in Kansas. Age 18 to 30 preferred. She had written carefully, honestly, and when his first letter arrived, she had felt the first flutter of hope in many months. Now she stood here, 20 years old, clutching her worn carpetbag and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. "Miss Rose." The voice came from behind her, deep and uncertain. Helena turned and found herself looking up at a man who stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. He held his hat in his hands, revealing thick dark hair that fell slightly across his forehead. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-green, like the ocean she had left behind, but somehow warmer. He looked younger than she had expected, perhaps 25 or 26, with strong features and a jawline darkened by stubble. He wore clean denim trousers, a tan shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and scuffed leather boots that had seen hard use. "Mr. James." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. His face broke into a smile that transformed his entire countenance from serious to genuinely welcoming. "Xander, please, I am mighty glad you came. I was not entirely sure you would." "I said I would." Helena straightened her spine, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "You did, and that means something out here." He reached for her carpetbag. "Is this all you brought?" "There is a trunk as well. It should be in the freight car." "I will get it loaded. My wagon is just there." He gestured to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I thought perhaps you might want to freshen up at the hotel first or get something to eat." The consideration in his voice surprised her. She had expected someone more rough, more demanding. "I would appreciate something to eat, thank you." They walked to the small restaurant attached to the general store, and Helena felt the curious stares of the townspeople as they passed. She knew what they were thinking. Another mail-order bride, another Eastern woman who would not last a month in the harsh prairie. She lifted her chin and kept walking. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Xander pulled out a chair for her, another surprise, and then sat across from her with his hat on his knee. "I know this is strange," he said after they had ordered. "Meeting like this. I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you right away. The ranch has a main house with 2 bedrooms. You can have your own space until you feel comfortable. We will be married by the circuit judge when he comes through next week, if that is still your intention, but even then, I want you to feel this is your choice." Helena studied him carefully. "You are not what I expected." "Neither are you," he said, and there was warmth in his voice. "Your photograph did not do you justice." She felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked down at her plate as the food arrived. They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Helena found herself relaxing slightly. Xander did not press her with questions or expectations. He simply ate his meal and occasionally pointed out landmarks through the window, telling her small details about the town and the surrounding area. "You get much rain here?" she asked, making conversation. "Some. We get thunderstorms pretty regular in the spring and summer. Big ones sometimes that roll across the plains with nowhere to stop them." He paused. "Does that bother you?" Helena hesitated. She had not mentioned her fear in her letters. It seemed foolish, childish even. But something in his open expression made her want to be honest. "I have never cared for thunder, since I was a child." He nodded slowly, not mocking, not dismissive. "My mother was the same way. She used to say the thunder reminded her of cannons from when she was young during the war. Everyone has something that troubles them." The understanding in his words loosened something tight in her chest. "Thank you for saying that." After they finished eating, Xander settled the bill and helped her up into the wagon seat. He retrieved her trunk from the station, lifting it as though it weighed nothing, and secured it in the wagon bed. Then he climbed up beside her, took the reins, and guided the horses out of town. The landscape that opened before them was unlike anything Helena had ever seen. The land stretched flat and endless in every direction, covered in golden grass that rippled like water in the afternoon breeze. The sky was impossibly vast, a dome of brilliant blue unmarred by buildings or trees. The horizon seemed 1,000 miles away. It was both beautiful and slightly terrifying in its openness. "It takes some getting used to," Xander said, as though reading her thoughts. "The space, but I have come to love it. There is a freedom here you cannot find in crowded places." Helena could see what he meant, though she also felt exposed, as though the sky itself was watching her. She gripped the wagon seat as they rolled along the rutted road and tried to imagine making a life in this vast emptiness. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. Xander's expression brightened. "I have about 500 acres, most of it grazing land for cattle. The house is not fancy, but it is solid. My father built it with his own hands, and I have made improvements over the years. There is a good well, a barn, a chicken coop, and a small vegetable garden that needs tending. I have 3 ranch hands who work with me, but they bunk in the barn and keep to themselves mostly. Good men, reliable. Do you have family nearby?" His expression dimmed slightly. "My parents both passed. My father 5 years ago, my mother just last year. I have a sister who married and moved to Colorado, but we write when we can. Mostly it has just been me." He glanced at her. "That is why I placed the advertisement. A ranch is meant to be more than just work. It is meant to be a home." The sincerity in his voice touched her. "I understand. I lost my parents as well, both in the past year. I am sorry." He said it simply, but she could hear the genuine sympathy. "It is a hard thing." They rode in silence for a while, and Helena found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He had strong, capable hands on the reins, and he handled the horses with easy confidence. There was a quiet strength about him, not the brash swagger she had sometimes seen in Boston men trying to prove themselves, but something more solid and dependable. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Xander pointed ahead. There, that is home. Helena looked and saw a house rising from the prairie, a simple two-story structure with a wide porch and a peaked roof. Beside it stood a large red barn, several outbuildings, and a windmill that turned slowly in the breeze. It looked sturdy and well-maintained, surrounded by fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the golden afternoon light. As they drew closer, Helena could see more details. The house had been painted white, though the paint was weathered in places. Curtains hung in the windows, and there were flower boxes beneath the sills, though the flowers had long since withered. The porch had a swing hanging from chains, moving slightly in the wind. Xander brought the wagon to a stop near the front porch and hopped down, then came around to help Helena descend. His hands were gentle but firm as he lifted her by the waist and set her on the ground. For just a moment they stood close, and Helena caught the scent of him, soap and leather and something else, something clean and masculine. Then he stepped back and reached for her trunk. "Let me show you inside." The front door opened into a main room that served as both kitchen and sitting area. The space was neat but spare, furnished with handmade wooden furniture and lacking any feminine touches. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the kitchen area had a good iron stove and a sturdy table. Everything was clean but worn, the home of a man who lived alone and did only what was necessary. "Your room is upstairs," Xander said, carrying her trunk toward a narrow staircase. "It was my mother's sewing room, but I moved a bed in there for you." Helena followed him up the stairs and found herself in a small room with a single window overlooking the front yard. The bed was simple but looked comfortable, with a clean quilt folded at the foot. There was a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a small mirror on the wall. It was plain but adequate, and the window let in good light. "I know it is not much," Xander said, setting her trunk down carefully, "but you can do with it as you like. Make it yours. It is fine, truly." Helena ran her hand over the quilt. "Thank you." He nodded and backed toward the door. "I will let you rest and settle in. There is water in the pitcher, and I will bring up some hot water in a bit so you can wash properly. Supper will be ready in about an hour." After he left, Helena sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. The room was quiet except for the sound of the wind outside and the distant lowing of cattle. She felt displaced, suspended between her old life and this new one, not quite belonging to either. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses in the small closet and arranging her toiletries on the washstand. She had brought a few books, a photograph of her parents, and her mother's jewelry box, which contained more sentimental value than actual valuables. These she arranged carefully, trying to make the space feel more like her own. True to his word, Xander knocked softly and brought up a pitcher of hot water. He lingered in the doorway for just a moment, as though wanting to say something more, but then simply nodded and left her to her privacy. Helena washed away the grime of travel and changed into her other dress, a simple gray cotton that was more practical than fashionable. She brushed out her dark brown hair and pinned it up, studying herself in the small mirror. She looked tired, and there were shadows under her hazel eyes, but there was also something else, a tightness in her jaw that spoke of determination. She had come this far. She would see it through. When she descended the stairs, she found Xander in the kitchen, stirring something in a large pot on the stove. The table had been set for 2, and there was fresh bread cooling on a cutting board. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "I hope you like stew. It is about all I am good at making besides eggs and bacon. Stew is perfect." Helena moved closer, feeling awkward. "Can I help? You could slice that bread if you like. Knife is there." They worked in companionable silence, and Helena found the domesticity of it oddly comforting. This was something she understood, the simple routines of preparing a meal. When everything was ready, they sat across from each other at the table, and Xander served them both generous portions. The stew was better than Helena expected, hearty and flavorful, full of vegetables and tender meat. She realized she was hungrier than she had thought, and they both ate without much conversation at first. "You are a good cook," Helena said after a while. Xander shrugged. "Necessity. A man has to eat." He paused. "But I will admit it will be nice to have someone else to cook for. Makes it feel less like just fuel and more like a meal." Helena found herself smiling. "I enjoy cooking, actually. My mother taught me. I would be happy to take over that duty. We can share it. I imagine you will have plenty else to do, getting settled, deciding what you want to do with the place." He gestured around. "Like I said, make it yours. Our home should feel like it belongs to both of us." The word "ours" sent a strange flutter through Helena's stomach. This was really happening. In a week, they would be married. This would truly be her home, and this man would be her husband. As if sensing her thoughts, Xander set down his spoon and looked at her seriously. "I want you to know, Helena, that I will do everything I can to be a good husband to you. I know we are starting this backward, married before we barely know each other, but I believe we can build something real here. Something good." Helena met his gaze and saw only honesty there. "I believe that too. I would not have come if I did not." After supper, Xander showed her around the property in the fading light. He introduced her to his 3 ranch hands, weathered men who tipped their hats politely and called her Madam. He showed her the chickens, the vegetable garden that needed attention, and the barn where his horse and the wagon team were stabled. Everything was well organized and maintained, evidence of Xander's careful stewardship. As darkness fell, they returned to the house, and Xander lit the oil lamps. Helena felt exhaustion pulling at her, the long journey and the emotional weight of the day finally catching up to her. "You should rest," Xander said. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to start figuring out routines." Helena nodded and moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Xander, thank you. For being kind, for being understanding. I know this is strange for you too." "It is," he agreed. "But I am glad you are here, Helena. I truly am." She climbed the stairs to her room and prepared for bed, changing into her nightgown and brushing out her hair. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds, more stars than she had ever seen in her life. The vastness should have frightened her, but instead, she found it strangely beautiful. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the prairie night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer, she could hear Xander moving around downstairs, banking the fire, checking the doors. The sounds were domestic, reassuring. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her. Over the next few days, Helena began to settle into a rhythm. She woke early, dressed, and went downstairs to find Xander already up, having tended to the morning feeding of the animals. She prepared breakfast while he washed up, and they ate together as the sun rose over the plains. The mornings were cool and pleasant, the air crisp and clean. After breakfast, Xander went out to work with his men, moving cattle, mending fences, or whatever the day required. Helena spent her time exploring the house more thoroughly, cleaning and beginning to make small changes. She washed the curtains and hung them back, freshly pressed. She swept and scrubbed floors, beat rugs, and polished the few pieces of furniture. She went through the kitchen and organized supplies, making a list of things they needed from town. In the afternoons, she tackled the vegetable garden, which had been neglected but was not beyond saving. She weeded, watered from the well, and coaxed the struggling plants back to health. The physical work was satisfying, and she found herself enjoying the sunshine and fresh air, so different from the cramped streets of Boston. Xander always returned for the midday meal, and they would sit together and talk. Helena learned more about his life, about growing up on the ranch, about the challenges of cattle ranching and the unpredictability of the weather and the markets. He asked about her life in Boston, and she told him about her childhood, her parents, her education. She had attended a good school, she explained, and loved reading and music, though she had no piano here. "Maybe someday," Xander said thoughtfully, "if things go well. I would like you to have the things that make you happy." In the evenings, after supper, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Xander would sometimes whittle, his hands moving with practiced ease as he shaped small figures from wood. Helena brought out her needlework, repairing clothes or adding decorative touches to plain linens. They talked during these times, easy conversation that flowed naturally. Xander had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise, making her laugh when she least expected it. He was also thoughtful, asking her opinion on matters concerning the ranch, listening carefully to her ideas. Helena found herself relaxing around him, the initial awkwardness fading into something more comfortable. On the 5th day, Xander rode into town and returned with supplies, including fabric Helena had requested for new curtains and some seeds for the garden. He also brought her a package wrapped in brown paper. "I saw this and thought of you," he said, looking almost shy as he handed it to her. Helena unwrapped it carefully and found a book, a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman. She looked up at him, surprised and touched. "How did you know I like poetry? You mentioned it once, and I saw you reading that book of poems you brought," he shrugged. "Thought you might like something new." Helena pressed the book to her chest, feeling emotion well up unexpectedly. It was such a small gesture, but it meant he had been paying attention, that he thought of her when they were apart. "Thank you. This is very thoughtful." That evening, she read some of the poems aloud while they sat on the porch, and Xander listened with genuine interest, asking questions about the meanings and her interpretations. It was a deeply pleasant evening, and when Helena finally went up to bed, she realized she was feeling something she had not expected to feel so soon: content. The circuit judge arrived in Coolidge on a Tuesday morning, and Xander and Helena rode into town together for the ceremony. Helena wore her best dress, a deep green silk that had been her mother's, carefully preserved. She had pinned her hair up with extra care and wore her mother's pearl earrings. Xander wore clean black trousers, a white shirt, and a string tie. He had shaved carefully and slicked back his hair, and Helena thought he looked quite handsome, though she did not say so aloud. The ceremony took place in the church, a small white building at the edge of town. The judge was an older man with a kind face, and the witnesses were the minister and his wife. It was a simple ceremony, the words familiar and formal. Helena's hands trembled slightly as she placed hers in Xander's, but his grip was steady and warm. "I, Xander James, take you, Helena Rose, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." His voice was clear and strong, and he looked directly into her eyes as he spoke the words. When it was her turn, Helena's voice was softer but equally sincere. "I, Helena Rose, take you, Xander James, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." The judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Xander leaned down to kiss her cheek, a gentle, respectful gesture that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. They signed the papers, shook hands with the judge and the minister, and walked back out into the sunshine as husband and wife. "How do you feel?" Xander asked as he helped her up into the wagon. "Strange," Helena admitted, "but also right somehow." He smiled at that. "I know what you mean." They stopped at the restaurant for a wedding meal, and Xander ordered a small cake to be delivered to the ranch the following day, a surprise he had arranged earlier. They talked and ate, and Helena felt the shift in their relationship, the formalization of their commitment to each other. On the ride home, the sky began to change. Dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, building rapidly into towering masses that blocked out the sun. The wind picked up, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Xander glanced at the sky with a practiced eye. "Storm coming. A big one by the look of it. We should get home quickly." He urged the horses to a faster pace, and Helena gripped the wagon seat as they jolted along the road. The clouds continued to build, turning from gray to an ominous greenish black. Lightning flickered in their depths, still distant but approaching fast. They reached the ranch just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Xander quickly unhitched the horses and got them into the barn while Helena hurried into the house. By the time he joined her, the rain was coming down in sheets, driven sideways by powerful gusts of wind. Xander closed and latched the door, then moved through the house checking windows. Helena stood in the main room, listening to the rain hammer on the roof and watching the lightning flash through the windows. Her heart was already beginning to race. Then the thunder came, a low rumble that grew into a tremendous crack that seemed to shake the house. Helena flinched, her hands clenching into fists. "It is all right," Xander said, moving to her side. "The house is solid. We are safe here." Another flash of lightning lit up the room, followed almost immediately by a boom of thunder so loud Helena gasped and took a step backward. Her heart was pounding now, her breath coming faster. She knew it was irrational, but she could not help it. The sound triggered something primal in her, a fear she could not reason away. Xander seemed to realize this was more than simple concern. He moved closer, his expression gentle. "Helena, you are all right. I am right here." The storm intensified, the thunder now almost continuous, rolling across the plains with terrifying power. Helena felt herself beginning to shake. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to maintain control, but another tremendous crack of thunder made her cry out. Without hesitation, Xander stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. "I have got you. You are safe." Helena pressed her face against his chest, her hands clutching his shirt. She felt his arms tighten around her, strong and protective, and she let herself lean into him. His heart beat steadily against her ear, a counterpoint to the chaos outside. "Just listen to my voice," Xander said softly. "Focus on that. The storm cannot hurt you here. These walls have stood through 100 storms like this. You are safe." His hand moved up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers gentle in her hair. The other arm remained firmly around her waist, holding her close. Helena felt the warmth of him, the solid strength, and gradually her breathing began to slow. The storm raged on, but somehow, held in Xander's arms, it seemed more distant. He kept talking to her, his voice low and soothing, telling her about other storms he had weathered, about how the rain would nourish the land, how the cattle would not mind, how tomorrow the air would be fresh and clean. Time seemed to stretch. Helena lost track of how long they stood there, but slowly the thunder began to move away, growing more distant. The rain continued, but with less violence. Helena realized she was no longer shaking and that she felt almost peaceful, wrapped in her husband's embrace. "Better?" Xander asked quietly. Helena nodded against his chest, but she did not pull away, and neither did he loosen his hold. They stood together in the dimness of the storm-darkened room, and Helena felt something shift inside her. This man, who had been a stranger just days ago, had held her through her fear without judgment, without mockery. He had simply been there, solid and steady, offering comfort. She lifted her head to look up at him, and found his blue-green eyes looking down at her with such gentleness that her breath caught. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Xander reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. "Thank you," Helena whispered. "You do not need to thank me." His voice was rough with some emotion she could not quite name. "I meant what I said in my vows. For better or worse, if you need me to hold you through every storm for the rest of our lives, then that is what I will do." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of fear. Something was blooming in her chest, warm and unexpected. She realized with sudden clarity that she was beginning to care for this man, truly care for him. And the realization was both frightening and wonderful. The thunder rumbled again, farther away now, and Helena barely flinched. Xander kept his arms around her, and she let herself rest against him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Eventually, the storm passed, rolling eastward across the plains. The rain softened to a drizzle and then stopped altogether. Pale evening light filtered through the windows. Xander finally, reluctantly, loosened his hold. "I should check on the animals, make sure everything is secure," he said. Helena nodded and stepped back, immediately missing the warmth of him. "I will start supper." He reached out and squeezed her hand briefly, then grabbed his hat and headed out into the wet evening. Helena moved to the kitchen, her movements automatic as she prepared a meal, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying the feeling of being in his arms, the sense of absolute safety she had felt. She touched her cheek where his fingers had brushed and found herself smiling. When Xander returned, damp and smelling of rain and fresh air, they ate supper quietly. There was a new awareness between them, a shift in the energy that hummed almost visibly in the space. They were married now, and they had shared their first real moment of intimacy, though not in the physical sense most would expect on a wedding night. After supper, as Helena washed the dishes, Xander came up behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Helena, I want you to know, I meant what I said about giving you time. We are husband and wife now, legally, but I will not press you for more than you are ready to give. I want you to come to me when you are ready, not because you feel obligated." Helena turned to face him, drying her hands on her apron. She looked into his honest eyes and felt that warm bloom in her chest expand. "You are a good man, Xander James," he smiled, looking almost shy. "I try to be." That night, Helena lay in her bed listening to the sounds of the house settling. Across the hall, she could hear Xander moving around in his room, preparing for bed. She thought about him, about his kindness, his patience, his strength. She thought about how safe she had felt in his arms. She was beginning to understand that what she felt was not just gratitude or relief at having escaped her circumstances in Boston. It was something deeper, something that had the potential to grow into real love. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Helena took over more of the household duties, and she found satisfaction in caring for their home. She baked bread, tended the garden, collected eggs, and prepared meals that Xander praised generously. She also began to add feminine touches to the house, small things like embroidered pillows, fresh flowers in mason jars, and the new curtains she had sewn. Xander worked from dawn until dusk, but he always made time to share meals with her, and they spent their evenings together. Sometimes they read, sometimes they talked, and sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, enjoying each other's presence. More storms came as summer progressed, as Xander had warned they would. Each time, as the thunder began to roll, Helena would feel the familiar tightening of fear, and each time, Xander would be there. He would pull her into his arms without hesitation, holding her until the worst had passed, talking to her softly, keeping her grounded. These moments of enforced closeness were accelerating the growth of Helena's feelings. She found herself looking forward to his return each day, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch. She noticed small things about him, the way his hair curled slightly when it was damp with sweat, the small scar on his left hand from some long-ago accident, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable but intense, and she would feel heat rise in her cheeks. The attraction between them was growing, a current that ran beneath every interaction. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch swing together, rocking gently in the cooling air. The sun was setting in a blaze of color, and Helena had her needlework in her lap, though she was not really working on it. Xander sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, whittling another of his small figures. "What are you making?" Helena asked. He held up the piece of wood, which was beginning to take the shape of a horse. "Thought I would try something more detailed this time." Helena watched his hands work, strong and sure, and felt a flutter in her stomach. Without really thinking about it, she leaned against him slightly and felt him shift to accommodate her, his arm coming to rest along the back of the swing behind her shoulders. They sat like that until full darkness fell, not talking, just being together. When they finally went inside, Xander walked Helena to the foot of the stairs, as had become his habit. "Good night, Helena," he said, as he always did, but this time Helena turned to face him fully. She reached up and touched his face, her hand cupping his jaw, feeling the roughness of his evening stubble against her palm. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, but he did not pull away. "Good night, Xander," she said softly, then rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, near the corner of his mouth. She felt him draw in a sharp breath. His hand came up to cover hers on his face, and for a moment they stood frozen. Then Helena smiled and slipped away, climbing the stairs to her room with her heart racing. Behind her, she heard Xander let out a long, shaky breath. The next morning, there was a new energy between them. Xander's eyes followed Helena as she moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast, and when she placed his plate in front of him, his hand brushed hers and lingered. After he went out to work, Helena stood at the window watching him stride toward the barn and admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was falling in love with her husband, perhaps had already fallen. The realization made her smile. That afternoon, she made an extra effort with supper, preparing Xander's favorite dishes and even attempting a pie with preserved apples. She changed into her nicest dress and took extra care with her hair. When Xander came in and saw her, he stopped in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over her. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice thick with some emotion. Helena felt herself blush. "Thank you. Supper is ready." They ate, and the air seemed charged with something unspoken. After the meal, Xander helped her clean up, working beside her at the sink. At one point they reached for the same dish and their hands touched. Neither pulled away. Xander turned to face her, still holding her hand, and Helena looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Helena," he said, his voice low, "I need to know, how do you feel about this marriage? I know it started as an arrangement, but it has become more for me, much more." Helena took a breath, gathering her courage. "It has become more for me too. I care for you, Xander. I think I am falling in love with you." The joy that lit his face was brilliant. "Truly, truly." She smiled, feeling suddenly lighter. These weeks with you have shown me what a good man you are, how kind, how patient. You make me feel safe and valued. I did not expect to find this, but I am so grateful I have." Xander lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "I have loved you for weeks now, I think. Maybe since that first storm when you let me hold you. You have brought life back to this house, Helena. You have brought life back to me." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears this time. "Xander." He pulled her closer, one hand coming up to cup her face as he had done during that first storm. "May I kiss you? Properly, I mean." In answer, Helena rose on her toes and closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question and an answer. Then Xander's arms came fully around her and Helena pressed closer, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more passionate. Helena felt heat flood through her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evening. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Xander rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I have wanted to do that for so long," he murmured. "I have wanted you to," Helena admitted. He pulled back slightly to look at her, his expression serious. "I want you to know I will never take you for granted. I will spend every day trying to deserve you." "You already deserve me," Helena said, "and I will try to deserve you." He kissed her again, and this time Helena melted into him completely, letting herself feel everything she had been holding back. When he lifted her and carried her toward the stairs, she did not protest. This was her husband, and she loved him, and she was ready. He carried her to his room, not hers, and set her down gently on the bed. The lamp on the nightstand cast a warm glow, and Helena could see the love and desire in his eyes as he looked down at her. "Are you sure?" he asked. One last check, one last offering of her own choice. "I am sure," Helena said, reaching for him. The night was tender and passionate, a consummation of not just their marriage but of the genuine love that had grown between them. Xander was gentle and attentive, and Helena felt cherished in a way she had never imagined. Afterward they lay tangled together, Helena's head on Xander's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Helena whispered back, and felt him tighten his arms around her. She fell asleep there, in his bed, in his arms, and knew she would never sleep in the other room again. The summer progressed into autumn, and Helena and Xander settled into their new life as a truly married couple. The work of the ranch continued, and Helena took on more responsibilities, helping where she could, learning about cattle and horses and the rhythms of ranch life. She became friends with some of the women in town, other ranch wives who understood the challenges and joys of this life. She learned to ride, with Xander teaching her patiently in the evenings, and soon she could accompany him on some of his rides around the property. The storms continued, and true to his word, Xander held her through every one. But Helena noticed her fear was lessening. With Xander beside her, the thunder seemed less threatening. His presence was an anchor, keeping her steady. One evening, as another storm rolled in, Helena found herself watching the lightning flash across the sky with more fascination than fear. Xander pulled her into his arms as always, but this time she did not bury her face against his chest. Instead, she watched the storm from the safety of his embrace. "It is beautiful in a way," she said. "The power of it." Xander kissed the top of her head. "You are getting braver." "You make me brave," she replied, turning to look up at him. "You make me feel like I can face anything." He kissed her then, deeply, and the storm outside became background music to their own passion. Autumn turned to winter, and the Kansas plains transformed under blankets of snow. The work changed with the seasons, and the house became a warm haven against the cold. Helena and Xander spent long winter evenings together, reading by the fire, talking about their dreams and plans. It was during one of these evenings that Helena realized she might be with child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but now she was fairly certain. She decided to wait until she was sure before telling Xander, making a trip to town to see the doctor to confirm her suspicions. The doctor, a kindly older man named Dr. Sullivan, examined her and confirmed what she had hoped. She was indeed expecting, probably due to give birth in early summer. Helena rode home with joy bubbling up inside her. She found Xander in the barn, mending some tack, and he looked up with a smile when she entered. "How was town?" he asked. Helena walked up to him, unable to contain her smile. "Productive. I saw Dr. Sullivan." Xander's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Are you unwell?" "No, not at all." Helena took his hands in hers. "Xander, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, processing the words. Then his face broke into the most brilliant smile she had ever seen. "A baby, truly, truly. Due in early summer, the doctor thinks." Xander let out a whoop of joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down. "I am sorry, should I not have done that?" "I do not want to hurt you." Helena laughed, delighted by his reaction. "I am fine. I am not fragile." He pulled her close, more carefully this time, and held her as though she was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this." "We made this together," Helena reminded him, her arms tight around him. They stood together in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and leather, and Helena felt completely, utterly happy. This was her life now, her real life, and it was more wonderful than she could have imagined. The winter passed in a blur of preparations. Xander built a cradle with his own hands, carving intricate designs into the wood. Helena sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and together they prepared the small room that would become the nursery. The room adjoined their bedroom, formerly the room Helena had first stayed in, now transformed with love and care. As spring arrived and the prairie came back to life with green grass and wildflowers, Helena's body changed with the growing baby. Xander was endlessly solicitous, helping with tasks that became more difficult, insisting she rest more, treating her like spun glass. "I am not going to break," Helena protested one afternoon as he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. "I know, but let me take care of you anyway," he said with that smile that still made her heart flutter. The storms returned with spring, and Helena found that her fear had diminished considerably. She still did not like the thunder, but with Xander's arms around her and the knowledge of the new life growing inside her, she felt more secure than ever before. The world felt right. In early June, on a warm morning full of birdsong, Helena went into labor. Xander immediately rode for the doctor and for Mrs. Patterson, a woman from town who served as a midwife. By the time they returned, Helena's pains were coming regularly, and she was both excited and frightened. Xander wanted to stay with her, but Mrs. Patterson shooed him out, insisting this was women's work. He paced on the porch, wearing a path in the wood until finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was actually only about 6 hours, he heard the lusty cry of a baby. Mrs. Patterson came out, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Mr. James, a healthy, strong boy." Xander nearly stumbled in his relief and joy. "And Helena, she is fine, tired but fine. You can come in now." He took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom. Helena lay propped up on pillows, looking exhausted and radiant at the same time, cradling a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was glorious. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Xander approached almost reverently and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his eyes were squinted shut, but he was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Can I hold him?" Xander asked, his voice choked with emotion. Helena carefully transferred the baby into his arms, and Xander felt his world shift. This tiny person, this perfect little human, was his son. His and Helena's. The love that flooded through him was so intense it was almost painful. "What should we name him?" Helena asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on one. Xander looked down at his son, then at his wife. "What about William, after your father?" Helena's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that, of course. He should carry a name with meaning." Xander sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still cradling the baby. "William James. Does that sound right?" "It sounds perfect," Helena said, reaching out to touch her son's tiny hand. The baby, William, seemed to agree, settling peacefully in his father's arms. The next months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Xander proved to be a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he could, walking the floor with William when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. Helena watched her husband become a father and fell even more deeply in love with him. William thrived, growing chubby and healthy, his eyes eventually revealing themselves to be the same blue-green as his father's. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he brought joy to every aspect of their lives. One evening, when William was about 3 months old, a storm rolled in. Helena was nursing the baby in their room, and when the thunder began, she felt only a small flutter of her old fear. Xander appeared in the doorway, ready to offer comfort, but Helena smiled at him. "I am all right," she said. "I have both my men here with me. What could possibly hurt me?" Xander came in anyway and sat beside them on the bed, putting his arm around Helena and looking down at his son nursing contentedly. "You are remarkable, you know that." "I had a good teacher," Helena said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You taught me that storms are just storms. They are loud and dramatic, but they pass. And when you are with people you love, safe and warm, they are nothing to fear." The thunder crashed outside, and William did not even pause in his nursing. Xander tightened his arm around Helena. "I love you," he said. "I cannot believe how lucky I am. A year ago, I was alone in this house, lonely and wondering if I would ever find someone to share my life with. And then you came, this brave woman who traveled all this way to take a chance on a stranger. You have given me everything." Helena lifted her face for a kiss, which he gave her tenderly, mindful of the baby between them. "You have given me everything too. A home, a family, love. I came here afraid and uncertain, but you showed me what it means to be truly safe, truly cherished." They sat together as the storm raged outside, the three of them in their warm cocoon, and Helena thought about how strange life was, how something that had started as a desperate arrangement had become the greatest love story she could have imagined. The years flowed by like water, each season bringing its own rhythms and changes. William grew into a sturdy, curious little boy, toddling after his father and trying to help with ranch chores. When he was 2, Helena discovered she was expecting again, and in the spring of 1885 she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, after Helena's mother. Margaret was a delicate, beautiful baby with dark hair like her mother and a temperament as sunny as her brother's. William was fascinated by his little sister, insisting on helping care for her, bringing her toys and singing to her in his childish voice. The ranch prospered under Xander's careful management. He expanded the herd, bought more land, and built a larger barn. Helena's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and to sell in town. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, happy. Helena became a pillar of the small Coolidge community. She helped organize church socials, taught Sunday school, and was always ready to help a neighbor in need. The other women in town had come to respect and love her, and she had built genuine friendships. Xander's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher grew as well. Other ranchers sought his advice, and he became known as a man of integrity. His hands were loyal to him because he treated them fairly and paid well. The ranch became one of the most successful in the area. Through it all, the love between Helena and Xander only deepened. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when the children napped, sitting together on the porch after the children were in bed, holding hands and talking about their days, their dreams, their life together. Storms still came, as they always would on the Kansas plains. Helena no longer feared them. She had learned that some of the most beautiful things, like William and Margaret, like the green prairie after rain, came because of the storms. She had learned that thunder was just noise, and that true safety came not from the absence of storms, but from having someone to weather them with. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xander came home early from town with a large package. Helena met him at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is that?" she asked, curious. Xander's grin was mysterious. "Open it and see." Helena carefully unwrapped the package and gasped. Inside was a beautiful accordion, its wood polished to a shine, its keys gleaming. She looked up at Xander with tears in her eyes. "You said you missed music," he explained. "I know it is not a piano, but I thought maybe this would work. I have been saving for it." Helena threw her arms around him. "It is perfect. You are perfect." That evening, after the children were in bed, Helena sat on the porch with her new accordion, teaching herself the basics while Xander listened, his face full of contentment. The music floated across the prairie, a new sound in their familiar world. William learned to ride a horse at age 4, sitting in front of his father on the big roan gelding, squealing with delight. Margaret grew from a baby into a toddler, her personality emerging as both sweet and stubborn, a combination of both her parents. In 1887, Helena gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas. He was a quiet baby, thoughtful even in infancy, with a serious expression that made visitors smile. William and Margaret adored him, fighting over who got to hold him, who could help feed him, who could make him smile. The house that had once seemed so sparse and masculine was now filled with life and laughter, with children's toys scattered on the floor, with the smell of baking bread and the sound of Helena's accordion in the evenings, with the thundering footsteps of children racing through rooms, with love in every corner. Xander often paused in his work to simply look at his home, at his family, overcome with gratitude. He would think back to that day at the train station, seeing Helena for the first time, nervous and brave at the same time, and marvel at the journey they had taken together. Helena would sometimes take out the letters Xander had written her during their courtship, reading them again and smiling at his careful words, his honesty, his hope. She kept them in a box with other treasures, and she imagined that one day, when their children were grown, she would show them these letters and tell them the story of how their parents met, how love grew from uncertainty into something strong and sure. One summer evening, when William was 7, Margaret 5, and Thomas nearly 2, the family sat together on the porch after supper. Xander held Thomas on his lap while the older children played in the yard, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. Helena sat beside her husband, her accordion resting against her leg. "Play something, Mama," Margaret called. "The pretty song." Helena lifted the accordion and began to play a gentle melody she had learned, a folk song about home and family. Xander reached over and took her free hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Happy?" he asked quietly. Helena looked at her children playing, at the home they had built, at the man beside her who had shown her what love truly meant. Happier than I ever imagined possible. "Me too," Xander said, bringing her hand to his lips. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a storm approaching from the west. Helena felt the familiar flutter but no real fear. She had weathered so many storms in Xander's arms, and each time she had emerged stronger, surer, more certain of their love. "Should we get the children inside?" Xander asked, noticing the darkening sky. "In a moment," Helena said, finishing her song. "Let them play a little longer." As the first drops of rain began to fall, they called the children in. William and Margaret ran laughing up the porch steps, and Helena scooped up Margaret while Xander held Thomas. They all crowded into the house, shaking off raindrops, and Xander closed the door against the storm. The rain came down harder, and the wind picked up. The children pressed their faces to the window, watching the storm with excitement rather than fear. They had grown up secure and safe, knowing they were loved, and the storms held no terror for them. Helena busied herself getting the children ready for bed while Xander lit lamps and checked the windows. By the time the children were in their night clothes, the storm was in full force, thunder booming and lightning flashing. "I want to see the storm," William declared. "Can we watch from the window?" Xander lifted him up so he could see better. "See how the lightning lights up the whole sky, and listen to that thunder. It is loud, but it cannot hurt us here." Margaret climbed onto Helena's lap. "I like the thunder. It is like the sky is talking." Helena smiled and hugged her daughter. How different this was from her own childhood, when she had cowered under blankets, terrified of every sound. Her children had no such fear because they had been raised with love and security, taught that storms were natural, not threats. After the children were finally in bed, Helena and Xander returned downstairs. The storm continued, and almost without thinking, Xander pulled Helena into his arms as he had done so many times before. "Still doing this, even though I am not afraid anymore," Helena teased gently. "I will always do this," Xander said. "Storm or no storm, afraid or not, I will always hold you. It has become my favorite thing, I think." Helena laughed softly and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. They swayed slightly, almost dancing, moving to music only they could hear. "You ever think about that first storm?" Helena asked. "When you held me for the first time?" "Often," Xander admitted. "That was when I knew, I think. When I knew this was real, that we could build something true together. I was so frightened," Helena remembered, "of the storm, of this new life, of everything, but you made me feel safe. You made me feel whole," Xander countered. "This house was just a building before you came. You turned it into a home." They stood together as the storm gradually passed, as they had stood through countless storms over the years. The thunder moved away, the rain softened and eventually stopped. The clouds broke apart, revealing stars scattered across the black sky. "I should check the barn," Xander said reluctantly. "I will come with you," Helena said. They pulled on coats and boots and walked out into the fresh, washed night. The air smelled clean and alive, and puddles reflected the stars. They checked on the horses and the cattle, finding everything secure, and then stood in the barn doorway looking out at their land. "I have been thinking," Xander said slowly, "about expanding again, maybe building a new house, something bigger for our growing family." "I love our house," Helena protested. "I do too," Xander agreed. "But we are running out of room, and I want to give you something grand, something worthy of you." Helena turned to face him, taking both his hands. "Xander James, you have given me everything I could ever want. A home full of love, beautiful children, a partnership built on respect and affection. I do not need something grand. I just need you." He pulled her close and kissed her, and Helena felt the same flutter of excitement she had felt the first time he had kissed her years ago. The passion between them had not dimmed with time and familiarity. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer, more complex. "I love you," Xander murmured against her lips. "More than I can say." "Show me then," Helena whispered back, and he did, right there in the barn, with the stars watching through the open doors and the smell of hay surrounding them. Later, as they walked back to the house hand in hand, Helena thought about the path that had brought her here. The losses she had endured, the fear she had conquered, the courage it had taken to answer that advertisement and board a train to Kansas. She thought about the man who had met her at the station with kindness in his eyes and gentleness in his hands. She thought about the storms, both literal and figurative, that they had weathered together. Life had not been without challenges. There had been difficult seasons when cattle prices fell, years when drought threatened the grass, illnesses that frightened them, the normal trials of raising children. But through everything, they had faced it together, their love the foundation that supported everything else. As the years continued to pass, the children grew. William became a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere. He learned to rope and ride, to tend cattle and mend fences, and it was clear he would one day take over the ranch. But he was also gentle and thoughtful, traits he had learned from both his parents. Margaret grew into a spirited girl with a love for music and art. She spent hours with Helena's accordion, teaching herself to play, and she filled the house with drawings and paintings. She was bold and fearless, climbing trees and racing her horse across the prairie, but also tender-hearted, rescuing injured animals and nursing them back to health. Thomas remained the quietest of the three, but his thoughtful nature revealed a sharp intelligence. He loved books and learning, and Helena spent hours teaching him to read and do sums. Xander built him a small desk where Thomas would sit for hours, reading everything he could get his hands on. In 1890, Helena gave birth to their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Sarah Ann. She was a surprise, coming 6 years after Thomas, but she was welcomed with joy by the entire family. Her siblings doted on her, and she grew up surrounded by love from every direction. The ranch continued to prosper. Xander proved to have a good head for business, making smart decisions about when to buy and sell, how to manage his resources. They were able to hire more hands, to expand their herd, to make improvements. The ranch became one of the most respected in Kansas. But despite their growing prosperity, Xander and Helena remained grounded. They remembered where they had started, the uncertainty and the risk. They treated their employees well, paid fair wages, and were known for their generosity to those in need. Coolidge grew as well, from a small frontier town into a more established community. A proper school was built and all the James children attended. A new church went up, and Helena sang in the choir. More families arrived and the town began to feel more permanent, more settled. Through it all, the love between Xander and Helena remained the center of everything. They still made time for each other, still held hands on the porch swing, still danced together in the kitchen when the children were asleep. Their passion had matured into something even deeper, a love that was as much about partnership and friendship as it was about romance. They knew each other completely, could read each other's moods and thoughts with a glance. They finished each other's sentences and laughed at the same jokes. They supported each other's dreams and forgave each other's flaws. They had built a life together that was solid and beautiful, and they both knew how rare and precious that was. On their 10th anniversary, Xander surprised Helena with a trip to Topeka, arranging for his sister from Colorado to come and watch the children for a week. It was the first time they had been alone together since Sarah's birth, and the time away was like a second honeymoon. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, attended a concert. But mostly they just enjoyed being together, talking without interruption, sleeping late, making love in the middle of the day. It reminded them of who they were as individuals and as a couple, separate from their roles as parents and ranchers. "We should do this more often," Helena said as they sat in a restaurant, enjoying a meal they had not cooked themselves. "Agreed," Xander said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I love our children and our life, but I love you too, just you, and sometimes I miss having you all to myself." Helena smiled. "I feel the same way. It is good to remember that we were us before we were parents." They returned home refreshed and reconnected, ready to dive back into the busy chaos of family life. The children were thrilled to have them back, and the house seemed to vibrate with the energy of 4 children all talking at once, all trying to tell their parents everything that had happened during the week. As the children grew older, Helena and Xander began to talk about the future, about what they wanted for their children, about their own dreams. They talked about eventually passing the ranch to William, but also about making sure the other children had opportunities, whether that meant education or money to start their own ventures. They talked about growing old together, about someday being grandparents, about all the years still ahead of them. These conversations were always held on the porch after the children were in bed, sometimes accompanied by the sound of distant thunder, a reminder of where they had started, of the fear Helena had overcome, and the way Xander had helped her through it. "Do you remember the first time I held you during a storm?" Xander asked one evening, the question coming out of nowhere. Helena smiled. "Of course. I was terrified, shaking like a leaf." "I was terrified too," Xander admitted, "but for different reasons. I was afraid I would not be able to help you, that you would always be frightened and I would be helpless to stop it." "But you did help me," Helena said. "You held me and you talked to me and you showed me I was not alone. That is all I needed." "It turned out to be what I needed too," Xander said. "Holding you, protecting you, even from something as simple as fear of thunder, it made me feel like I had a purpose beyond just running a ranch. It made me feel necessary." Helena leaned against him. "You are necessary. To me, to our children, to this life we have built. We need you, Xander, every day." He kissed the top of her head. "And I need all of you. You are my everything." The seasons continued their eternal cycle. William turned into a young man, tall and strong like his father, responsible and hardworking. He began courting a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Emma, and Xander and Helena could see that their son had found someone special. Margaret, at 15, was beautiful and spirited, with a line of young men hoping to court her. But she was more interested in her music and her art than in romance. She talked about maybe going to a city someday to study music properly, and while the thought of her leaving made Helena's heart ache, she supported her daughter's dreams. Thomas, at 12, was already reading at a level far beyond his age. He talked about becoming a teacher or maybe even a lawyer. He loved the ranch but did not have the same calling to it that William did, and Xander made sure he knew that was all right, that he could choose his own path. Sarah, at 6, was the baby of the family and thoroughly spoiled by everyone. She was bright and charming, with Xander's eyes and Helena's smile, and she had everyone wrapped around her little finger. The years brought changes beyond their family. The frontier was gradually disappearing, becoming more settled and civilized. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more commerce. Technology advanced, with new inventions making life easier. The wild, dangerous days of the early frontier were fading into history, but some things remained the same. The land still stretched endlessly, The sky was still vast and blue, and the storms still rolled across the plains with their thunder and lightning. The work of ranching still required strength and dedication. And love, real love between two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other every day, was still the most valuable thing in the world. On a warm summer evening in 1895, when they had been married for 13 years, Xander and Helena sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their children were scattered around the yard, William teaching Thomas to rope a fence post, Margaret playing with Sarah in the grass. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked suddenly. "Answering that advertisement, coming here?" Helena looked at him in surprise. "Never, not once." "Why would you ask that?" Xander shrugged. "I know your life is hard here. The work is endless, the weather is harsh, there is not the culture or refinement you had in Boston. I just wonder sometimes if you wish for something different." Helena took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Xander James, listen to me. I have never been happier than I am here with you, with our children, living this life. Boston was my past, but this is my present and my future. You are my present and future. I chose you, and I would choose you again every single day." Relief and love washed over his face. "I chose you too, and I would make the same choice every time." They kissed, a long, deep kiss that held 13 years of love and commitment, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Look at us," Helena said, "still acting like newlyweds." "I hope we are still acting like newlyweds when we are 80, Xander replied. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and they both looked toward the horizon where dark clouds were building. Helena felt nothing but a small flutter of awareness, no fear at all. "Storm coming," Xander observed. "I know," Helena said calmly. "We should get the children inside." They called the children in and prepared the house for the storm. As the rain began to fall and the thunder grew louder, the family gathered in the main room. William and Thomas played checkers, Margaret read to Sarah, and Xander and Helena sat together on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders. When a particularly loud crack of thunder made Sarah jump, Margaret pulled her close. "It is all right, Sarah. It is just noise. We are safe here." Helena smiled, hearing her own words echoed by her daughter. This was her legacy, she thought. Not just children and grandchildren to come, but this sense of security, this knowledge that storms could be weathered, that fear could be overcome, that love was the strongest shelter of all. The storm passed, as storms always did, and life continued. William married Emma in a beautiful ceremony, and 2 years later, they gave Helena and Xander their first grandchild, a boy they named Xander William James, after his grandfather. The joy of holding her grandchild, of seeing her son as a father, overwhelmed Helena with happiness. Margaret did go away to study music, but she came home for holidays and wrote long letters. She eventually met a music professor and fell in love, returning to Kansas with him to start a music school in a nearby larger town. Thomas went to university to study law, just as he had always dreamed. He wrote home regularly, full of excitement about his studies, and visited when he could. He eventually opened a law practice in Topeka, but remained close to the family. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman who surprised everyone by falling in love with ranching. She married a neighboring rancher's son, and they bought land adjacent to Xander's, so she remained nearby. Through all these changes, Xander and Helena remained the steady center. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines, but their love never fading. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming richer and more profound. They became grandparents many times over, and their home was often filled with the laughter of grandchildren. They taught them to ride and rope, to bake and sew, to read and think. They told them stories of the old days, of when Kansas was still frontier, of how their grandmother had come from Boston on a train to marry a man she had never met. The grandchildren loved these stories, especially the one about their grandmother's fear of thunder and how their grandfather had held her through every storm. It became a family legend, a symbol of their grandparents' love. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It was a beautiful day in late summer, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food. Children ran everywhere, playing games. The adults sat in the shade, talking and laughing. As evening approached, William stood and called for everyone's attention. He raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast to my parents, to the best example of love and partnership anyone could ask for. They have shown us all what it means to commit to another person, to work together, to face challenges as a team. They have built not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy. To Xander and Helena James." "To Xander and Helena," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Helena felt tears on her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She looked around at all the faces, at the children and grandchildren, at the family she and Xander had created together, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Xander squeezed her hand. "We did all right, did we not?" "We did better than all right," Helena said. "We did beautifully." As the celebration continued, dark clouds began to build on the horizon. Helena noticed them but felt no concern. One of the grandchildren, little Anna, William's daughter, came running up to her. "Grandma, is it going to storm?" "It looks like it," Helena said, pulling the child onto her lap. "Are you scared of thunder, Grandma?" Anna asked. "Papa says you used to be." Helena smiled. "I was when I was younger, but your grandfather taught me not to be afraid. He showed me that storms are just part of life, and that when you have people you love around you, they cannot hurt you." Anna considered this seriously. "So if I am scared, someone will hold me, always," Helena promised. "That is what family does. We hold each other through the storms." The storm rolled in as the party was winding down. Some families headed home quickly, but many stayed, gathering inside the house that had been expanded over the years to accommodate large gatherings. The main room was full of people, talking and laughing, comfortable and safe. When the thunder started, Helena found herself surrounded by her children and grandchildren, by the life she and Xander had built. Xander's arm came around her automatically, a gesture so familiar it was like breathing, and Helena leaned into him. "Still my favorite place," she murmured. "Mine too," he said, kissing her temple. They stood together, surrounded by family, as the storm raged outside. The thunder boomed and the lightning flashed, but inside there was only warmth and love and the sense of being exactly where they belonged. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost friends to age and illness. They watched the world change around them, technology advancing, the old ways fading. But through everything, they had each other. As they grew into their 70s, their pace slowed, but their love never did. They spent more time sitting on the porch, watching the world go by, holding hands and reminiscing. They attended the weddings of grandchildren and the births of great-grandchildren. Their family tree had grown large and sprawling, but Xander and Helena remained the roots, the foundation from which everything else grew. On a spring evening in 1910, when they had been married for 28 years, a storm rolled in. It was a big one, violent and dramatic, the kind that used to terrify Helena. But as the thunder crashed and the rain hammered against the roof, Helena sat in Xander's arms on their bed, completely unafraid. "You know what I realized," she said softly. "What is that?" "I do not even remember the last time I was afraid of thunder. It has been years, I think. You cured me completely," Xander chuckled. I do not think I cured you. I think you cured yourself. I just stood beside you while you did it." Helena thought about that and realized he was right. She had found the courage within herself, but she could not have done it without him. That was what love was, she thought. Not fixing each other, but supporting each other while you fixed yourselves. "We make a good team," she said. "The best team," Xander agreed. They fell asleep that night to the sound of rain on the roof, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for thousands of nights before. They were old now, and they knew their time was not infinite, but they also knew that what they had built together would last far beyond their own lives. Their love was woven into the fabric of the ranch, the family, the land itself. When Xander turned 75, the family threw him a big party. He was still strong and healthy, still working the ranch with William, though at a slower pace. His face was deeply lined from years in the sun, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still the same blue-green, still full of warmth when he looked at Helena. Helena was 70, still beautiful in the way of women who have lived full, rich lives. Her hair was silver, her hands showed the work she had done over decades, but her smile was still bright and her spirit was still strong. They danced at the party slowly, to music played on the accordion Margaret had given Helena as an anniversary gift, a newer, finer instrument. Their children and grandchildren watched with tears in their eyes, seeing the love that still burned bright after nearly 3 decades. "I love you," Xander whispered as they swayed together. "Every day, more than the day before." "And I love you," Helena replied. "More than words could ever say." That night, after everyone had gone home, they sat on their porch as had become their custom. It was a clear night, the stars brilliant overhead, and Helena rested her head on Xander's shoulder. "It has been a good life," she said softly. "The best life," Xander agreed. "I would not change a single thing. Neither would I." Helena took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "When I stepped off that train in Coolidge all those years ago, I was so scared. Scared of the unknown, scared I had made a mistake, scared of everything. But then I saw you, and something inside me knew it would be all right." "I was scared too," Xander admitted. "Scared you would take one look at this rough rancher and get back on the train. Scared I would not be enough for you." Helena lifted her head to look at him. "You have always been more than enough. You have been everything." They kissed, their lips meeting in a kiss that held 28 years of love, passion, partnership, and devotion. When they pulled apart, both had tears on their cheeks. "Promise me something," Helena said. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how long we have left, we will always have this love, this connection. Promise me we will hold on to each other." Xander pulled her close. "I promise. Through every storm, Helena, through every storm I will hold you." They sat together as the night deepened. Two people who had taken a chance on each other decades ago and built something beautiful. The wind rustled through the grass, the familiar sound of the Kansas plains, and in the distance they could hear the lowing of cattle, the sounds of the ranch that had been their life's work. As they finally went inside, Xander paused in the doorway and looked back at the land spread out before them, at the home they had built, at the legacy they were leaving. He felt Helena's hand slip into his and he squeezed it gently. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes. For getting on that train, for taking a chance on me, for every day since then." Helena smiled up at him. "Thank you for being worth it, for being the man I hoped you would be, and so much more, for holding me through every storm." They walked inside together, closing the door on the night. The house was quiet now, just the two of them, as it had been in the beginning. But it was a comfortable quiet, full of memories and love, the kind of silence shared by people who knew each other completely. As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routines of a lifetime together, Helena thought about the journey they had taken. From strangers to friends to lovers to partners to parents to grandparents, their relationship had evolved and deepened, becoming something strong and enduring. She thought about all the storms they had weathered, both literal and figurative, the fear she had overcome, the challenges they had faced, the losses they had endured, but also the joys, the triumphs, the love that had grown and flourished. She climbed into bed beside Xander, and he immediately pulled her close, as he had every night for 28 years. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt completely at peace. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," came his reply, soft and sure. They fell asleep like that, together, as they had been through all the years, through all the storms, through everything life had thrown at them. They had built a life together out of hope and courage and love, and it was a life that would echo through generations. The ranch would continue, passed down through their children. The family they had created would grow and expand, spreading across Kansas and beyond. Their story would be told and retold, becoming the foundation story of their family, the reminder of what love could build. But more than that, they had shown each other what it meant to truly commit, to truly love, to truly be partners in every sense of the word. They had taken the uncertainty of a mail-order marriage and transformed it into a love story for the ages. And through it all, through every storm that rolled across the Kansas plains, Xander had held Helena, just as he had promised. Through every storm he was there, solid and steady and true. And in being held, in being loved so completely, Helena had found not just safety, but her truest self, her best self, the person she was meant to be. As the years continued and eventually came to their natural end, as all lives must, the love between Xander and Helena remained the one constant, the one sure thing in an uncertain world. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would last far beyond their time. And on quiet evenings, when storms rolled across the prairie and thunder boomed across the sky, their descendants would gather together, holding each other close, and remember the story of Helena and Xander, of the mail-order bride who was afraid of thunder and the cowboy who held her through every storm, and they would know what real love looked like.